Caught my wife draining my savings for alcohol and Adderall. Left her with a note. Now I'm at the beach house living on hope and silence. My wife and I started dating back in March 2021. By April 2022, she had moved into my house. We tied the knot in January 2024. This is my first marriage and her second. She'd been divorced for more than a decade, claiming her ex-husband was abusive. Between him and me, she'd dated 2 other people. She has a daughter from that previous marriage, my stepdaughter, who is now an adult. I'd met her ex a handful of times. These days he seemed relatively stable, remarried with 2 more kids. Still, whenever anything involving their daughter came up, both my wife and her ex lapsed into childish arguments about who held more control or who was doing right by her. When my wife and stepdaughter moved in with me, my house was an hour away from her daughter's high school. Stepdaughter, a freshman then, split her time living with us or with family near her school. After we were married, we bought a house right in my stepdaughter's school district and moved there. I kept my first house, hoping someday we'd go back. It's in a coastal beach town both my wife and I love. Now that my stepdaughter is in college, we're trying to rent out our current house so we can finally go back. Frankly, neither of us ever felt at home here, but my wife also wants to return to school herself. Her dream program is much closer to that original house. I'm completely behind her on that. So much is changing for us, mostly positive, except the emptiness my wife feels now that her daughter's gone. That empty nester syndrome hit her harder than me. I have to admit, my stepdaughter wasn't the easiest person to live with, but that's another story. In February this year, things took a turn when I noticed our budget was imploding, massively overdrawn nearly every month. It didn't take long to track the source, my wife's spending at the ABC store, where we get our liquor. The numbers were staggering. Between liquor, wine, and cigarettes on my credit card, she's an authorized user, she was dropping more than $1,500 a month. Her salary was getting blown on Adderall, too, she's prescribed, but was buying extra with the excuse that the regular amount didn't work. Meanwhile, she worked barely 15 hours a week in retail, about $500 to $750 take home a month. The job was supposed to help her drink less, give her something to do. I cover everything else, mortgage on both houses, car leases, advised by my family lawyer since they're worthless in a divorce, credit cards, the works. Her money is her money. Our prenup makes that clear. As much as I love her, I'm a saver, a planner. Living with a spender is exhausting, and I started feeling like I was just underwriting one crisis after another. That month, I confronted her about the drinking and drug spending. She blew up, we fought, and I walked out, crashing at my old house, our vacation home because we always planned to move back. I stayed away for over a week. Eventually, she came and found me, said she'd change. I want to give her some credit, she did stop buying Adderall illegally and stuck to her prescription. But, lately, I've noticed she's running out early. On top of that, she's taking Xanax and haloperidol, the latter for sleep, she says. Adderall first thing in the morning, Xanax when she's anxious, which she doubles, then runs out, compensating with more alcohol. Haloperidol at night is prescribed. Since that February blow-up, it's been the same miserable cycle. More arguments about her drinking, promises to cut back, a few days of improvement, then she starts hiding bottles again. I tell her that 2 bottles of wine every night is not normal, that we're still burning $750 a month on this addiction. Never mind half a pack of cigarettes a day. I don't smoke at all and rarely even drink, maybe social occasions, but coffee and Coke Zero are my vices. She refuses to admit that 2 bottles a night is a problem. Sometimes it's more, sometimes she'll resort to beer if the wine runs out. We've tried everything, rehab, therapists, AA meetings, she flat out refuses. After each argument, she shrinks her drinking for a little while. We do these deals, no drinking until 5 p.m., only 1 bottle a night, 4 glasses max, but the pours get bigger, the drinking creeps earlier, and soon enough, she just doesn't care if I know. She drinks at home when I'm not there, hoping I won't notice. But as soon as I walk in, I can tell by the sound of her voice. She always denied it, until I eventually installed a camera in the kitchen and caught her in the act. That worked for a week, maybe, then she stopped caring if I saw. I'm at the end of my rope. I can't even keep my own bottles in the house without them disappearing, no amount of hiding works. Over time, I've gotten emotionally exhausted, worn to a nub having the same argument again and again. The endless apologizing, all of this time is different, only to watch things snap right back. On top of all this wasted money, I'm embarrassed to take her anywhere, she'll overindulge, act out. I love her deeply, I really do, but this life is breaking me. She refuses to accept that she has a problem or to get help, except, of course, for marriage counseling, which just makes me feel like she thinks I'm the problem. What am I supposed to do? I could cancel all her cards and cut her access to alcohol, but then she wouldn't be able to do basic things like gas up her car or get her nails done, and I'd feel like a controlling, abusive spouse. This past week, I've been sleeping in the guest room, but the tension and unease in the house are suffocating. We barely speak, just what do you want for dinner? Or I'm leaving for work. I've talked to my mother, and she's completely supportive if I decide to leave. But what happens with the main house, my dog, the furniture? I don't know. All I know is I'm running on fumes, and I just can't keep living this way. It's not exactly easy for me to just pack a suitcase and leave. Both of our cars are in my name. My boat and jet skis sit tucked away in the detached garage out back, all these things from my life, except for the house I had before we even got married. If I just walked out the door, I'd be leaving my entire life behind at that house. That idea is almost unthinkable. My mom tries to convince me to just throw some clothes, a few small sentimental items, and my dog into a bag and leave, that everything else is just stuff. She's probably right, and deep down, I know I should listen. But there's this stubborn part of me, maybe foolish, that still believes something could change between my wife and me. I keep torturing myself, wondering if leaving is the only way to show her that I'm absolutely at the end of my rope. If she would only get real help, I can picture us being so much better, having some kind of future together that isn't this constant struggle. Her doctor, honestly, I think is a total quack. The way she prescribes meds is terrifying, like throwing darts blindfolded to address whatever the latest crisis is, completely ignoring the deep-seated problems. It's a revolving door of pills. Haloperidol, something I've always associated with schizophrenia, was prescribed just to help her sleep because her body is so tangled up from all the uppers and downers she's taken. She was switched from Seroquel to haloperidol a couple years back, just because she complained about gaining weight. That doctor hasn't helped at all. If anything, things have gotten worse. I can't help but wonder if this borders on malpractice. Is this woman just telling my wife these pills are for sleep, when she knows something else is going on? Or does she really have no clue? It's a mess I don't know how to untangle. At least I have a little vacation time saved up. I'll probably take this week off to get my head on straight and try to figure out my next steps. I just got off the phone with my mom before sitting down here, and she echoes what everyone else seems to say: get the locks changed once I'm down there. Other than my dog, the rest are just things and I shouldn't worry about them. She's right, of course, but it's so hard to let go. I took the week off and drove to the beach house with the dog and 2 duffels. I left my wife a note on the kitchen counter with a Visa gift card for gas and groceries and a line that said, "I need to not hear ice in a glass for a while." Then I killed her authorized card from my bank app and felt like the worst person alive for about 2 hours. The ocean air did what it always does, it emptied my head. The house was stale and quiet and exactly the way we'd left it, mismatched glasses in the cabinet and the sea glass bowl on the coffee table with our old movie tickets under it. I changed the locks like my mom wanted, fed the dog, and slept through the night for the first time in months. On day 2, my phone went insane. Notifications from the driveway cam at the main house. It was dark and the floodlights kept clicking on and off. She'd backed my truck up to the detached garage and had a guy with her I didn't recognize. You could hear the metal scrape of the trailer jack. They were trying to drop a jet ski onto the trailer without the winch, and the guy was laughing. She was in house slippers and a hoodie, swaying. I called the neighbor across the street who I know is a light sleeper and asked him to go outside and just be present. He didn't even have to say anything, just walked across his lawn and stood with his arms folded while they fumbled. Then he called the non-emergency number for me when she went back inside and reappeared with a bottle. A patrol car rolled up, did the lights, the whole show. They didn't arrest anyone because technically no one had driven yet, but the officers told her she wasn't moving anything out of there at midnight, period, and that if she tried again they'd tow the truck. She called me 4 times screaming that I'd sent cops on her. I let it go to voicemail. The next morning, I woke up to a completely different call. Unknown number, hospital exchange. She'd been brought in by ambulance after a fall. I got there around noon. The ER doctor was younger than me and tired in that ER way. He told me her blood alcohol was ugly and her benzos were not 0. He said he didn't love haloperidol in the mix and raised his eyebrows when I told him her doctor was using it to knock her out at night. He called it off-label and then didn't say a thing because he can't, but I heard the subtext anyway. She had a purple knot on her forehead and that faraway look she gets when she's both embarrassed and not done. Her ex-husband showed up at the end of visiting hours in a button-down like he'd come from work. He stood there in the doorway with his hands on his hips and wouldn't look at me. Then he did look at me and said, "This isn't your fault," which landed like a brick. He told me he had to pick their daughter up the night before because she'd gotten the drunk FaceTime parade, too. I didn't know what to do with his sympathy and he didn't know what to do with mine, so we watched her sleep until a nurse asked us to leave. I tried to talk to her doctor the next day. The office manager told me HIPAA in a tone that suggested she'd said that word 1,000 times a week for 10 years. I left a letter anyway, with dates and what I'd watched happen in my house and my phone number at the bottom. I forgot I'd put the kitchen camera up to prove I wasn't losing my mind. Now all of that, the hidden pores, the noon refills, the nights she talked to me like I was across a football field, looked like evidence, but of what? I don't know. I printed a complaint for the medical board and put it in my glove box. It felt petty and vindictive and also like I was the only person in the room writing anything down. By day 4, she was home and mean. She said the only reason she drank that much is because I abandoned her. I told her I was at the beach because I couldn't watch her swallow herself anymore. I suggested she stay at her mother's for a few nights so we weren't both in the same house not speaking. She said she wasn't a child I could send away. I drove back to the beach house with the dog again and this time, before I did, I pulled the titles and keys for the boat and skis and took them with me. It felt like breaking into my own life. 2 nights later at almost midnight, I heard pounding on the beach house door, the kind that makes the hinges pop. It was her. She'd taken a rideshare 2 towns over and brought her desperation with her. She asked me why I changed the locks. I told her I didn't want to wake up to her in the kitchen. She sat down on the porch step and cried into her hands for maybe 5 minutes and then snapped her head up and told me I was controlling and abusive, and then cried again. She asked me to let her in. I told her I would if she could blow into my face and I smelled nothing. She laughed and called me insane and then tried to shove past me anyway. I stepped out, pulled the door behind me, and the dog, bless him, stayed exactly where I told him to stay. A neighbor flicked a porch light on across the street and then another. Someone called a cop. It was the same officer I'd dealt with when my trash cans kept getting knocked over by the raccoons. Small town. He walked her down the steps and into a cab. I closed the door and put my forehead against it and thought, what am I doing? The next morning she texted me a photo of a citation. She'd been pulled over in my car on the way back from the beach house and blew too high. The car was impounded and the tow yard wanted me, the titled owner, to pick it up. I stared at the text for a long time. I called my insurance and told them not to let her drive anything in my name. The rep put her on the policy as an excluded driver and told me to get the keys. There were no keys to get, they were in the impound lot. I decided to leave the car right where it was until my lawyer could tell me if me touching it made me responsible for whatever came next. I met with my lawyer that afternoon and told her the whole mess, with the smell of salt water still in my clothes. She said I needed to decide where I lived, legally, and pick one house. She would file for a separation agreement and ask for exclusive use of the beach house and the dog if that's what I wanted. Hearing exclusive use of the dog made me half laugh, half cry in her office like an idiot. She told me not to lock her out of the main house, not yet, and to stop leaving anything I cared about in a place where alcohol lived. When I got home, there was a folded paper stuck under my wiper blade, a summons for a protective order hearing 2 days later. Her affidavit said I'd withheld money and medication, that I'd threatened to take her car, that I'd monitored her with cameras. I stood in my driveway with that paper in my hand and felt the ground shift. My lawyer said show up, suit and tie, with the text she'd sent me the night she sat on my porch, with the camera still showing her drinking alone at noon, with the gift card I'd left on the counter for gas. I did. The judge asked me to talk first and I tried to make my voice not shake. The judge asked her a few questions and she answered them like a child who'd been caught, eyes down. The judge didn't grant the order and told us to stay away from each other anyway. We agreed to a temporary plan where she would stay at her mother's and only go to the main house with me there to get clothes, and I would move my boat and skis out within a week. I signed my name a million times and felt like I'd put my life in escrow. I rented a storage unit near the beach and spent a Saturday hauling the jet skis and a mountain of my 20s, camping gear, old surfboards, a busted arcade cabinet I always meant to fix, into it. My neighbor from across the street at the main house helped me winch the boat onto the trailer and didn't say a word about any of it, just grunted and nodded and gave me a thumbs up when we strapped down the stern. I changed the padlock on the detached garage and handed him an extra key. In the middle of all that, my stepdaughter called me from campus. She was crying and apologizing and then not, telling me she'd been the one picking up extra Adderall for her mom last year when the shortage was bad, that she thought she was helping because her mom said she needed it to get out of bed. I told her I wasn't mad at her and I meant it, and then I sat in my truck with the window down and the smell of gasoline and lake water and wondered how many little invisible kindnesses had been brick by brick building this mess. I'm back at the beach house now. The dog has taken to lying with his head on my left foot like he knows the world only balances if he pins me down. The coastal wind carries every sound. Last night I listened to a couple argue about dinner 3 houses over and it felt like eavesdropping on a life I used to have. My phone stays on the counter face down. I've got a tenant application on the kitchen table for the main house, and a court date circled on the calendar that will decide who sleeps where in the interim. I filed the complaint on her doctor. I changed my passwords. I kept the Visa gift card on the counter and didn't throw it away because it still feels like proof that I'm not trying to starve anyone. I keep waiting to feel triumphant or at least righteous. Instead, it's just quiet. The ocean does that. It softens the edges of everything until you can breathe. I don't know if I just blew up my marriage or if it already exploded and I'm walking around the crater. I do know the house smells like salt and coffee and not like wine, and my dog is snoring on my foot, and for now, that's enough. I signed the lease with the tenants on a Tuesday that smelled like cut grass and hot printer toner. They were a young couple with a baby on the way and a nervous laugh between them. I handed over 2 keys and a clause about no smoking and felt like I was handing over evidence that I could, in fact, still make a decision and stick to it. My lawyer emailed a draft separation agreement while I was walking them through where the water shut off lives. Exclusive use of the beach property and canine, it said, and I had to sit down on the front steps and read that twice like I'd never learned English. An investigator from the medical board called me that afternoon. He was careful with his sentences like each one had to be signed and notarized before it could leave his mouth. He said my complaint was received. He couldn't tell me anything, obviously, but he could take anything else I had. I told him I had dates and printable receipts and a camera cloud that was making me hate both technology and time. We met at a coffee shop near the courthouse that evening, a place with 3 mismatched couches and a tip jar that said college is a scam in Sharpie. He took copies and never once asked me to name her out loud beyond the spelling he already had, and when he left he told me to be safe, which I felt in my ribs. The night after the lease signing, my phone lit up with a name I don't ignore. My stepdaughter, hiccup crying before she got the hello out. She couldn't reach her mom. Find my iPhone had gone stale around a motel off the interstate that sells rooms by the week and has a light up sign that dropped the O years ago and never bothered to replace it. I called her father and he picked up on the second ring and said he was already halfway there. I told him I'd meet him. We ended up in separate cars facing the same stretch of vinyl curtains. The woman behind the plexiglass asked me what color toothbrush she'd been using if I was family. He said blue and I said green and we looked at each other and both felt the floor tilt. We found her on the second floor walkway sitting on a plastic chair with her knees bruised up and a half-eaten vending machine honey bun folded in its wrapper like she was saving it for later. She wasn't drunk in that cartoon way. She was damp-eyed and slow and said she'd taken just enough to feel quiet and then forgot what we were talking about. The ex said her name in that old marriage tone that sounds like a key trying to turn. I called the non-emergency line and asked for a wellness check and used the word immediate twice, which always makes people move faster. The same officer from my trash can raccoon saga showed up with a second one I didn't know. He asked me if I'd be willing to petition for a TDO. I said yes before I even got the letters lined up in my head. If you've never done it, the magistrate's office at 11 p.m. smells like burnt coffee and paper dust and everyone's eyes are at half-mast. They handed me a form and I filled in boxes under fluorescent lights while a man in a camo hat argued with an invisible person about a parking ticket. The magistrate asked me to tell her what made me believe there was a substantial likelihood of serious harm. I said the words Xanax, alcohol, Haldol, fall, DUI, and alone into that stale room like nails being tapped into a board. She stamped something with the finality of a garage door closing. The officers took her quietly. She looked betrayed and small and then she looked relieved in a way that made my throat hurt. The psych unit lived behind two sets of doors and a buzzer that made you think of submarines more than medicine. A social worker named Bree with the kind of tired that is hope under it arranged a family meeting the next afternoon. It was me and the ex-husband sitting side by side in chairs that squeaked and a nurse with a river tattoo peeking out of her sleeve. My wife walked in wearing socks with little rubber dots and the expression of someone walking into the principal's office for the 10th time. Bree said a lot of words about treatment modalities and levels of care. My wife said she could do outpatient easy and we all looked at the ceiling. I heard myself say, slowly so I wouldn't back out of it, that I couldn't come home to the same house with alcohol in it again. That if she wanted to be married to me, I needed 30 days somewhere locked and supervised and boring. She stared at me like I was a piece of furniture that had been moved 2 inches to the left. The ex surprised me by nodding so aggressively his hair moved. She asked if she could think about it and Bree said yes, but the clock on the wall ticked in a way that said no. She didn't sign that day. The emergency order expired and they gave her a paper with a hotline and a pamphlet with a stock photo of a woman staring into a mug. She called me from her mother's porch at midnight to tell me she was going to prove everyone wrong. I told her I'd be at the main house at 10 a.m. Saturday like the order says so she could get clothes. I showed up at 9:55 like a coward, because I wanted 5 minutes where the smell of the carpet was just carpet and not the ghost of wine. She arrived with her mom and a tote bag. We did the slow tour of her life: underwear, phone charger, the cardigan with the elbow hole she never throws out. She opened the hall closet and a bag of empty mini bottles tumbled out like sleet onto the floor. No one said anything. Her mother made a sound like a tea kettle that never gets up to a full boil. We didn't hug goodbye because the rules said we shouldn't. The rehab call came the next morning from a number that probably exists in every area code. They had an open bed. 30 days if insurance plays nice, longer if it grows horns. I told her I'd drive her there if she wanted me to. She said no and then yes and then no, and I said I'd leave the offer here on the counter if she came by. She got a ride with someone else. I stood at the sink and watched a speck of foam race the edge of the stainless steel and thought about how all I do now is watch bubbles I can't catch. The impound notice finally made its way to me like a bad postcard. Storage fees ticking upward, the kind of money that makes you feel stupid because it buys nothing but time and dust. My lawyer told me to get the car out before it snowballed into something I couldn't roll back down the hill. I went with my neighbor, the one with the folded arms and a moral compass you can set your watch to. The inside of the car smelled like old citrus and hand sanitizer and something under those layers that made you think of a dentist apparatus. There were 3 cans of LaCroix in the back seat that felt wrong in my hand because they were heavier than they should be. I cracked one and it was Pinot Grigio. She'd poured them out and poured them back in and lined them in the cup holder like little daily vitamins. I sat there with the white wine and a grapefruit can and felt something between awe and heartbreak, because who does that? Who puts that much thought into pretending everything's normal? That afternoon, a voicemail from her doctor hit my phone with a kind of clipped righteousness you only get from people who have never run out of anything in their lives. She said she'd been informed of a complaint, that I was not a party to the treatment relationship, and that any attempt to interfere would be documented. She said she would be advising her patient to seek legal counsel. I saved the message and emailed it to the board and my lawyer. Then I took the dog for a walk and watched him lose his mind over a crab scuttling sideways and felt almost human again. I got to the rehab facility by following a chalkboard sign that said admissions this way with an arrow someone kept redrawing and smudging. It looked like a summer camp for people whose lives had gone hazardous. My wife was there in a folding chair under a tree, papers on her lap, A nurse with kind eyes explaining the difference between residential and partial, like you decide between pepperoni or sausage on a pizza. She saw me and her face made 3 expressions in a second: anger, relief, and then something I haven't seen since March of 2021. I told her I was glad she was here. She told me not to be nice to her when she feels like this or she'll start to think she can keep doing whatever she wants, and I was grateful for the honesty crashing in through the window. She signed. I got a call 2 hours later saying insurance didn't like the diagnostic code and could we sign a form to appeal. I signed whatever anyone put in front of me that day. The next morning, she texted me from the facility's shared iPad to say she wasn't going to do a jail for 30 days. The counselor called me and said to hold steady, that ambivalence is a Monday. I put my phone face down and brined a chicken like some patriarch in an apron in an ad, because doing something with my hands that ends in dinner is the only way I know to turn the volume down. 2 days into rehab, her mother showed up at the main house with a locksmith. My driveway camera sent me a cascade of strangers' backs. I leaned on my horn the whole way down there like it was going to punch a hole through time and stop anyone from trying to invent new definitions of access. We stood in the yard with the agreement in one hand and a very confused man holding a bump key in the other. A patrol car rolled slowly by like it had wandered onto a movie set by mistake. The officer read the paper and then told her mother she could not change locks on a residence she didn't live in. Her mom told him I was a bully. The officer looked at my dog, who was sticking his head out of my truck like a cartoon, and then he looked at me and then he looked at the paper and said, "Ma'am, no." When they left, she put her hand on my arm for a second like she had something to say that wasn't an accusation and then didn't say it. The court date came in a courtroom with pews that had seen more praying than justice. The judge wasn't the one from the first hearing. This one had a face that could have been carved into a mountain. My wife wasn't there because she was learning how to fill out feeling charts on a whiteboard 20 miles away. Her lawyer, a man with a tie that had boats on it, asked for a continuance and got one. My lawyer slid me a sticky note that said breathing is free and I didn't know whether to laugh or marry her. We got a temporary order that put everything in amber: dogs, houses, bank cards, all of it paused like a movie. On the way out, I saw the ex-husband sitting on a bench under a watercolor of a lighthouse. He didn't see me. He was reading a pamphlet about codependency. For half a second I wanted to sit next to him and say, "Thank you for telling me it wasn't my fault," in a hospital hallway when no one else could find their voice. I kept walking. He kept reading. Back at the beach house, the ocean coughed up a storm in the late afternoon that made the sky look like it was thinking about swallowing the town. My stepdaughter came down for the weekend with a duffel bag and too many apologies in her eyes. We didn't talk about her mom for a while. We played fetch with the dog and burned hot dogs on purpose because they taste better that way. When the rain started, she sat on the floor and said she found a shoebox under her mom's bed last summer with those mini bottles lined up like a calendar and didn't say anything because she didn't know what to do. I told her I didn't either and that felt like a truce with the planet itself. When she went to sleep in the guest room, I stood in the doorway and listened for the sound of ice in a glass that wasn't there. This morning the rehab called to say she'd made it through a group without eye rolling and that counts as progress in a place where eye contact is currency. They asked if I'd be willing to come to family day next week. I said yes and then I hung up and stared at the wall and wondered whether yes means hope or just that I don't know how to stop showing up when someone looks like they might drown. The board investigator emailed me an acknowledgement letter that looked like it had been produced by a printer that also prints feelings. None. The beach house is clean in a way that feels like a new shirt. The dog still falls asleep with his head on my foot like he's sealing a letter. A pelican dive bombed next to the pier this afternoon and came up with nothing, shook itself off, and tried again. I paid the storage bill for the unit holding my boat and my arcade cabinet in my junior year of college and it felt like paying to keep a past on ice until I figure out what to do with it. I haven't heard the sound of ice in a glass in weeks. Last night the couple 3 houses down were clinking something celebratory on their porch and for a second my chest tightened before I remembered it wasn't my noise to manage. The ocean was loud enough to drown anything out anyway. I don't know if I'm waiting or moving forward. I do know the Visa gift card is still on the counter, the coffee tastes like coffee, and when I stand on the deck in the early morning, it's just me and the gulls, and quiet that feels like an answer even if I don't know the question yet. Family day smelled like floor cleaner and burnt decaf and everyone was trying too hard not to be the loudest person breathing. They sat us in a circle under a mural of mountains that looked like clip art and handed out worksheets with boxes labeled feelings like it was a tax return. My wife came in clutching a styrofoam cup and wearing those hospital socks with the treads like little Morse code. She scanned the room, landed on me and the ex-husband, and made that quick shoulder rise that's almost a wave if you squint. The counselor, Bree again, ponytail and a voice that could talk down a siren, had everyone read what they'd written about the last time the wheel came off. People cried in the way people do when they're tired of crying. When it got to my wife, she read in a flat classroom voice until she got to the part where she wrote "I wake up and hunt for the sound of ice," and then, her eyes jumped like the words were moving. She didn't look at me. She read "I lied so many small times I can't remember the order," and my chest did that thing where it tries to be both hollow and full at once. In the family session, Bree drew a triangle on a whiteboard and labeled the corners me, you, the thing and told us our sentences had to avoid sliding into the corners we didn't own. I said I couldn't live with alcohol anymore. I said I needed 30 days here and then something on the other side that didn't involve me being the hall monitor of my own kitchen. My wife rolled a pen between her fingers like a magician about to make it disappear and asked what the other side meant. Bree said aftercare. I said sober living or outpatient somewhere with a person I could call who wasn't me. The ex-husband surprised me by saying he'd started going to a group for people like us and that when he sits in a chair there he doesn't feel like he's made entirely of questions. My wife looked at him like he was standing somewhere she didn't recognize. They asked her to sign a release so they could talk to me and she did it without a fuss, a scrawl that looked like it had taken stairs too fast. In the case manager's office, I learned new words for old things. CIY and taper and that they didn't give benzos here unless your hands were shaking so hard you couldn't hold a spoon. They'd stopped the haloperidol. They were talking about sleep hygiene in sentences that sounded like lullabies from a sterile planet. Nobody wanted to touch the Adderall yet. We don't fix everything in a week, the psychiatrist said, and I felt both grateful and furious at time as a concept. Insurance tried to cut the legs out on day 9. A woman whose voice had been sanded smooth called me and said a peer-to-peer was needed, like two strangers were going to have a philosophical debate about whether my wife should be allowed to keep breathing. I sat in the parking lot under a pine tree and watched sap drip onto my windshield while their doctor argued with our insurance doctor and won my wife 5 more days. I bought a car wash and watched the sap smear around like I was painting with honey and called it my contribution to the day's victory. Back at the beach house, the dog watched the gulls as if he had appointments with each of them. The tenants in the main house called about the dishwasher chirping and flashing a code like it was trying to tell us something in robot Morse. I drove over with a crescent wrench and the kind of misplaced confidence that turns into YouTube in a hurry. While I was on my back under the sink, my shoulder hit the kickplate and 3 miniature liquor bottles rolled out and clinked into the light, the labels scuffed, their insides dry to a ghost shine. They weren't theirs, they were ours, mine by proximity, hers by need. I slid them into my hoodie pocket so the couple who had never done anything to me didn't have to know this house used a whisper. I told them the error code meant nothing dramatic and showed them how to push 2 buttons at once to make the beeping stop. On my way out, the woman thanked me and handed me a Tupperware of cookies as quickly as you hand a stranger your trust, and I stood in my truck eating one and tasting sugar in memory. 2 nights later, my phone lit up at 10:41 with her name and the words "I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this" stacked on top of each other like a broken fence. I drove to the facility without thinking through what I could actually do when I got there. The front desk had those little plastic plants that say "we tried." The tech on duty called a counselor. I could hear my wife down the hall saying "I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine" in that brittle way that means I'm falling apart. Bree came out and put a hand up like a traffic cop at half speed. "Give me 10, she said. I stared at a bulletin board with flyers for yoga and relapse prevention and a printout of a quote that made me want to eat the paper out of spite. After 9.5 minutes, Bree came back. "She wants to walk," she said. We walked the perimeter of the parking lot twice, 3 abused little islands of landscaping bearing witness. "I don't feel safe in my own head," my wife said, and I said I'd stand here by the stripe and meet her eye every time she came around. She said that was a weird sentence and then she smiled without the edges I hate. She didn't leave. "Ambivalence is a Tuesday," Bree had said. Turned out it was a Thursday, and who knew? The investigator called me again in that careful voice and asked if I had any additional recordings. I told him I had a voicemail from her doctor that sounded like she was writing it while it played. He asked for permission to take it and put it in a folder with a number on it twice as long as my phone number. I met him in the same coffee shop. He wore the same tie. He took the same notes. He didn't tell me anything because he can't. I don't know why I'm always surprised by the way the right thing never gives you any fireworks. The DMV did what the DMV does and sent a letter that managed to be both vague and threatening. Her hearing for the DUI is in a courthouse with a flag the size of a bedsheet. There's talk of an interlock, ignition breathalyzer, a class where you watch a video of a crash that might be stock footage and might be a Thursday 3 towns over. Her lawyer with the boat tie emailed mine. My lawyer called and said the words "best case old but not ancient judge" and "worst case goodbye license for a year" and told me to keep the car in a place no one could mistake for permission. I pulled the battery out like I was removing a heart and rolled it into the storage unit next to my youth. My stepdaughter drove down on a Friday in a car that rattled like a tambourine whenever it hit 50. She brought a bag of Hoodie's brand peanuts and this looked like she was trying not to touch the edges of the world. We went to the dog beach and let him off leash because he has better recall than either of us. She asked what family day was like and I told her the truth and the parts that mattered and left out the parts that didn't help. She said she was mad at her mom and then said she was mad at herself for being mad and then said she was tired of folding origami out of sentences so they wouldn't poke anyone. I told her that when I was her age I put everything I felt in a shoebox and carried it up 3 flights of stairs every time I moved and that it turns out feelings are terrible roommates and lousy movers. We ate peanuts on the tailgate and watched the water do its same old tricks and it actually felt like an evening. My mother-in-law tried a new angle and put a grocery bag with folded shirts and a note in loopy cursive on the porch at the beach house. She likes the soft one for sleeping, the note said. I found it on my camera and in real life and put the bag in my trunk and didn't text anybody because there was nothing to say that wasn't mean. On day 15, I walked into the facility for another family session and my wife handed me a letter in counselor-approved handwriting that started with "I hate this part," and that's about the only honest first line there is. She wrote about pouring wine into seltzer cans and the math of timing the buzz and the way she used my cups because she liked to pretend I was there when I wasn't. She wrote that she hid bottles not because she thought I wouldn't find them but because the hiding stood in for help when she didn't know how to ask for the real kind. She wrote that she would always pick quiet over anything if she had to pick quickly. She apologized without the stupid ribbon on top. I looked at the paper and thought about how none of this fits into the little boxes the outside world likes to keep its misery in. "What do you need from me?" Bree asked, looking at me like a person and not a target. "I need to know I can go to sleep without trying to hear which drawer the corkscrew lives in," I said. My wife nodded. She didn't argue. Progress in a room like that is so small it feels like maybe you imagined it. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a number I didn't know and I let it go to voicemail, and later it was a nurse from the rehab's medical office saying, "Please don't bring in anything scented because it sparks people." I laughed in the car by myself like a lunatic because someone somewhere thinks I show up with candles. I showed up with nothing that wasn't me on day 19, sat on a couch that had seen more tears than a handful of funerals, and listened to my wife tell a group of strangers that she had a plan. It wasn't poetry. It was get through this, then 3 evenings a week in a room where coffee goes cold on purpose, then sober living 2 towns over because distance is a tool, not a punishment. She said she would ask me for rides and I could say no and she would not call me a monster. She said she would find a new doctor and let 3 different sets of eyes look at any pill with her name on it before it ever got near her mouth. I stared at her mouth like it was making contract law in the air. On my way out, a woman with a badge that said utilization sat me down in a doorway and said they got another week out of insurance by saying exactly the right combination of Wilco codes. I'll never learn. I texted my lawyer that if there's a medal for people who fight with invisible bureaucracies for a living, someone should mail 1,000 of them. In the middle of all this, the neighbor with the arms folded default found me by the boat trailer and told me in his gruff way that his brother died in a motel like that one out by the interstate and that he wishes someone had been there to do what I did even if it only moved the clock 5 minutes. He clapped me on the shoulder so hard my teeth clicked and somehow that worked better than anything anyone wearing a cardigan has said in 6 months. The court sent another envelope with my name in a font that wants you to feel small. The continuance got continued. I keep thinking there will be a day where someone bangs a gavel and declares a winner. It's all elastic and pause buttons and signatures under words like temporary that are starting to feel permanent. Last night I moved the sea glass bowl from the coffee table to the bookcase because the dog keeps thumping it with his tail and because I found our movie stubs under it, and one is from the first night we ever stayed up until the ocean went black and the moon came up like a coin. I put the stubs back under the glass anyway because I still believe paper can hold things in place. The rehab called this morning and said she made it through a cravings group without bargaining with the air. They want me there for a discharge planning meeting early next week. Sober house, they said. New prescriber, they said. No benzos, they said it like a prayer. I said I'd be there. I hung up and put on coffee and stood on the deck while the wind tried to take the skin off the water and thought about how many days in a row I haven't heard the sound of ice in a glass. The dog put his head on my foot as if to pin me to this exact minute. Somewhere 20 miles away my wife is folding her socks differently because someone told her new habits make new grooves in your brain. Somewhere a judge's calendar has my last name misspelled. Somewhere in a file cabinet is a complaint with my handwriting on it that may or may not matter.